I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Marina Reid Wilson. Marina is a registered psychologist, has done extensive work across organizations in the public sector, the private sector, large listed firms and small organizations. She's an outstanding skier, and she's an even better coach as well, and I'm delighted to be joined with Marina today. We're going to explore this idea about how organizational cultures have changed over the last couple of years in particular as a result of COVID and this sort of crazy period that we've been living in. And Marina's written a terrific paper that'll be available to all of you to read to support this conversation as well. But I'm really looking forward to diving into this subject with Marina as we explore it through this conversation today. So, Marina, thank you for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It goes without saying that this has been like a crazy, unscripted, traumatic, energizing. It's been a period that has had, I think it's fair to say, a full range of emotions for us human beings going around the planet. And clearly there's been impacts on organizations and culture as well, which is a space that I know you are really passionate about and bring a deep expertise around. But as you sort of like reflect on the last few years in particular with COVID and lockdowns and isolation and all that we all went through, sort of, what sort of reflections do you have about that sort of period and how that's impacted us as human beings?
Well, I think it's really been a forced experimentation. Businesses, organisations, leaders have been forced into experimenting with this whole idea of remote work and, this return to work is problematic because it isn't just back to pre-pandemic times. Things have moved, things have shifted. And I think it's really important that leaders particularly and managers consider the impact that it's had on people and to be able to really engage with their workers to work out this second wave of experimentation, because I don't think it's just a one size fits all. I think there does need to be some experimentation, some learning, some observation, because I don't think we're going to nail it right straight away. Yeah,
nothing like this was ever in any organization's risk register. I think I'm right in saying. This was never in an MBA module at various business schools around the world. So it's very much, I love this idea about experimenting and sort of, almost co-developing the solutions here. But as we get into this, let's be clear about like in your mind, what's changed as a result of, think back to the way we used to work and the way organizations used to work and how they work now, and what do you think has changed?
Well, I think employees have been empowered. I think they've realised that actually they can play a part in some of these decisions. They were forced to work from home, certainly, but now we've all realised that productivity actually was okay. There's some great research out there that suggests that employees more so, believe that productivity is actually better when they have this ability to work from home. Well-being overall actually has increased. However, interestingly, exercise, discretionary exercise, is less when you work from home.
Is that right?
Yeah, so there's lots of impacts, but also it's very much, as I said, that there isn't a one size fits all. It's a unique situation for everyone. It's different for different people, different companies, different organisations. So that's why it's really important to pay attention, But back to what you said, what has changed, I think it really is the employees feel empowered to say, actually, this is how I want to work. They want to be consulted more. And if, there's again some great research that suggests that 40% of employees would prefer to leave their job and find something alternate if they're forced to come back to the office full time. So we do, as leaders of companies, we actually do need to involve them. We do need to pay attention to what is working, because just mandating people to come back to work isn't going to cut it, and it's not going to be beneficial to organisations.
Okay, so here we bump into the first tension, right? Which is organisations exist for a purpose, whatever that is. And every organisation will have its own purpose. So it exists for a different purpose than making people happy. That's not why organisations exist.
Yeah.
Now, it would be nice if people were happy as they worked in our organisations, but that's not its purpose, if you will. But there's a tension between keeping people happy and achieving our objectives as an organisation.
Absolutely.
So how do we sort of manage that tension? Is that a good way to think of it, first of all? And
I think it is. I think there is a tension there, but I also think it's not really about happiness. Well-being isn't just happiness. So when people are well, physiologically and psychologically, they are going to be more productive, which then meets the needs of the organisations to make profit, to deliver on their promises to their clients, to their boards, etc., their shareholders. So while there is a tension, they also go hand in hand. We can't have one without the other, I don't think. Look at Elon Musk today in the news. He's mandating people have to get tough. I don't know how successful that will be, anyway.
Time will tell, I suppose.
Time will tell.
Yeah, the assets have legs, as they say, particularly in industries like that where people are very mobile. So this is still a bit of an experiment that's
absolutely
unfolding here. What are you noticing in the clients and organizations that you work with as it relates to the sort of the impacts on culture? I mean, I'm sure you're seeing and hearing, and we probably all have examples and stories of people that just you haven't seen them for 3 years, or it's damn difficult to get them to come back in.
Yeah.
They're rusted on to being remote, but that must have impacts.
Absolutely. It's called cultural decay.
Right. Okay.
And there is a concern. Definitely employers are very worried about that. And it's a lack of social connection. It's that incidental, informal catch-ups with people. That creates culture. And if people aren't crossing paths face to face, you lose some of that culture. The culture changes. So some organisations such as Apple recently suggested no, people must come in, Monday, Tuesday and Thursday, for example, to avoid that decay. So it isn't still an experimentation, and organisations need to measure, they need to be paying attention, they need to continue this connection with their people to understand what is working, what isn't working from both sides, because it's not one party has all the power and the decision making. It has to be mutually beneficial and acceptable. So there's a lot going on with culture, but I think some organisations are actually happy to be fully remote, but it depends on the actual industry. So tech companies can much more easily do that, and typically in terms of the people that often work in tech companies tend to be more introverted, so they're typically happier. But there's some organisations and workplaces that it just wouldn't work, so it needs to be a balance, but it's very much dependent on the person, the organisation, the industry as to what is going to work. And I don't think we've really made a huge headway in resolving this. I think it is an ongoing something that we need to continue to look at.
So I love this idea of cultural decay.
You love that.
Well, in a perverted sort of way, I love it. No, but it's a nice way to sort of describe actually what I sense is probably happening in organizations to a greater or lesser degree. I mean, I take your point. There are lots of organizations that are absolutely thriving and are seeing this and this disruption as an opportunity and are using it to be a magnet for talent in a way that they wouldn't have even conceived of previously. Okay, so there are those examples, and there are those examples of where it feels like literally dragging people to get them back in to create those connections and so on and so forth. So as you're working with clients, and I'm thinking more you're coaching clients now rather than your clients that you're doing more clinical type work with. They're busy executives, they're under pressure, there's a lot going on for them. I mean, are you finding that you've got some ways of prompting them to sort of think about the culture and what's happening and ways to deal with the sort of whether they're thriving and whether they're languishing, sort of approach?
I think it is about self-awareness. I think it is about recognising what is going on for me. How am I truly feeling? How is this working? So taking time to reflect on that, and also, getting out there and communicating with your people. What is working for people? And again, it's that continual communication piece. It's that transparency. How are we doing? Are we just saying, nope, we're all good, we're back at the office, and because that's mandated? It needs to be encouraged. We need to create that psychological safety and trust in organisations to make sure people can actually be honest about what is going on for them. There are still people that are worried, very worried about COVID. Maybe they've got, elderly parents or children that are immunocompromised. So we do need to pay attention to the individual. And I think it is just about keeping aware, not pretending that all this is finished with and we can go back to business as usual. It is not. It is a new world, and we need to acknowledge that and consider how we're going to do this, how we're going to do this together, how we're going to all, pay attention. So I think it's... Yeah.
I mean, I think the two things that have really shifted in a way that we didn't expect is, first of all, preferences, personal preferences. So people got used to, and they've made different lifestyle choices, and you've seen it, where people have literally packed up and left, significant lifestyle choices. So people's individual and personal preferences have been accentuated through this time, and fear. And you can never be 100% sure about what's actually happening with what's going on in people's personal lives, because there is a lot of genuine, we never used to go to work and be fearful in the way that we have been over the last few years. Now, lots of people have moved on for various reasons, but there is still a significant portion that are just fearful for the reasons that you mentioned. But how do we open up this conversation amongst teams? So I'm a busy person, running an organization or a team or whatever. How do we open this conversation up so that it is psychologically safe and it addresses perhaps fear and preferences and the tension with the organization's requirements and the individual? Like this is quite a complex now equation, right? Like, so how do we as managers and leaders actually, even in a practical sense, open that up and have that conversation?
Well, I think it is about being leaders that are human, so being able to connect with your people, so having those relationships, so prioritising, those relationships. Okay. But also I think people need to be assured of anonymity in terms of answering some of these questions that can impact, how they're perceived in the organisation. So things like pulse surveys, life cycle surveys, where you are actually checking in on people and finding out what is going on for them. And, I think this needs to happen on a somewhat regular basis. So, I mean, I don't have a special number in mind, but I think there needs to be an avenue where people can be open and honest, that it's not going to come back and bite them. So pulse surveys are a great way to check in on people. But also, you know, leaders of organisations need to be connected to their people. It's building that trust, being able to be vulnerable. It's about, yeah.
A lot of people have written, and we all sort of believe, and had seen evidence in the United States particularly, of the Great Resignation.
Mm-hmm.
And that people were going to, and particularly in this day and age where, when we're, you know, sort of very remote, you know, you can be at an employer today and have your online meetings, and literally if I didn't like that, I could almost click and start with a new employer on Monday. And it was that easy. It was very frictionless to move, and so we were seeing a lot of mobility, and you know, this Great Resignation, you know, was what we were thinking about at the time. Are we seeing the sort of job changing and the mobility that we expected? Have you seen any evidence of that here in Australia?
I haven't seen any real research, like any real data. Certainly in America, that, you know, apparently. But in Australia, there's anecdotal evidence of that. You do hear about some people potentially moving, but I don't think at the rate that was predicted. Certainly people have had the opportunity to consider what does work, what are my preferences. I actually like this idea of working from home. So there is more strength in, you know, what you prefer to do, but I don't think we're really seeing the great, the high numbers. I don't think so. Certainly people are somewhat mobile, and there is a, you know, it's a tricky time out there for employers to get the right people. So I think part of it is about retaining people so that they don't want to leave. I think that's where we need to pay attention. And as I said before, if people know that there is flexibility at work, there is opportunity to, you know, have a few days at home and at work, I think that is going to retain people, and for the people that do leave organisations, it will attract them to those organisations.
So is this, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I know you won't let me anyway, but is this like an opportunity to kind of reset and sort of, you know, not try and necessarily automatically snap back to the past, but we're not 100% clear about what the future looks like, but maybe an opportunity to reset whatever is the right model for us for this next phase.
Yeah.
Again, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, the Productivity Commission brought out a report on, you know, return to work, and September 21 they said this is beneficial for organisations to be a bit hybrid. It is actually going to work in our favour in the long term in terms of productivity, efficiencies, etc., people's well-being. So it's worth, you know, resetting, as you say. And it's also important to recognise that we are adaptable. I mean, pre-pandemic, if you'd asked many of the leaders of organisations, can we switch to completely remote work? Yeah. I would say most of them would have said no chance.
Rocks in your head.
Exactly. And look how quickly we shifted. So we are very adaptable. And so I think that's also a really key thing. It doesn't mean that we now then have to become rigid again. I think we have to maintain a sense of being agile, being able to be flexible. Let's see what the future holds and not expect that we're going to have all the answers. And we might, you know, put some structures in place. This is what's working now, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be working, you know, in 2 years' time. So there is a lot of unpredictability at the moment, ambiguity, and we have to, as leaders, to be able to be comfortable with that. It's not about just going, right, this is how it's going to work. It's about being flexible.
It sounds to me almost like, and it feels to me like it almost needs a new kind of social contract between the employer, the organization, the boss, whatever, and employees. And in that contract, if you will, we kind of reset what works for the organization, what works for the employee, and come at it from the perspective of, okay, so what's the right combination? How can we rewrite this in a way that we both get what we need? The organization wins and the employee wins, whatever that looks like.
Exactly.
That may be a bit too simple to think of it in that way, but it's...
Yeah. And I think that's why measurement is important. So that's why things like pulse surveys are helpful. It's about, measuring productivity. So, okay, if we have everyone working 3 days a week at home or 2 days, whatever it might be, what does that do to productivity? It is, like I said, a bit of experimentation, but things need to be measured for us to be able to, provide any real, forward plan.
But also a bit of give and take on both sides, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm an individual, it's not all about me having
Correct.
all of my preferences met, that actually I'm attached to an organization and contributing to it, because I obviously think it's important, that's why I've chosen to work there, that I need to also bring something to the party, and if that means, being more present, physically present in the workspace, well, maybe that's part of the new contract, and equally as the employer, or the organization sort of thinking about, okay, well, how do we sort of create an environment where we can all thrive? What does that environment look like?
Yeah, exactly. And to be able to do that, where both parties feel as though they have a role to play, there has to be that trust. There has to be the belief that people are going to do the right thing by the organisation. The organisation is going to do the right thing by the employee, so there does have to be a sense of trust.
Okay, so now we're kind of onto something, and maybe this takes us down a completely different avenue for another day, but it's, if we're going to rewrite the social contract and trust and tap into those sort of individual relationships and value those, the way you said, this is leader-led behavior.
Absolutely.
It's unlikely that it's going to come from here, right? So then let's close this out by sort of really zeroing in on what this means for managers and leaders in terms of, okay, so now the managers and leaders of our organizations have maybe a different responsibility or a different behavior in mind as they sort of think about how to do this. So what do managers and leaders need to do differently here?
So I think they need to be honest that they don't have all the answers. I think gone are the days where we think leaders know the best for the organisation, for their people. We don't know. So there has to be a little bit of transparency, a little bit of, dare I say, vulnerability on the side of the leaders, that they don't have all the answers, that they are willing to listen. That not just to listen, but they're going to engage their people and actually, find out what is working and what isn't working. So it's about that. It's about, having good tech solutions so that you can actually measure some of these things. So we're not just going blind. We need to be able to do some of that measurement to be clear. Like I said, we need to build trust. We need to be in front of people. We need to prioritise those relationships. So, there's a lot to be done, and it's not about, just let's kick on and this is how it's going to be. I think we're in a state of flux, and I think we need to pay attention.
Okay, excellent. Marina, so I'm a busy manager or leader, an executive person. What are the 3 takeaways that you really want people to walk away with from this conversation today?
That's a great question. So the key takeaways are, look, the world has changed. It is unpredictable. We don't know all the answers. We need to keep looking. We need to continue to experiment. We need to continue to learn. We need to engage our people. It isn't about, the responsibility is not just the employer, it's not just the employee. It is a combined effort.
We're going to co-develop this together.
Exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. I always find like I could talk with you all day, honestly. And I appreciate you spending the time today to explore this. It's uncharted, right? And so, it is an opportunity. Some will see it as a threat. It's also an opportunity. And I think just having the time to sort of sit, reflect, unpack, think, is really useful. So you've certainly helped me at least do all that today, and I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
Chris. Nice talking to you.
Great.